The Scotch Malt Whisky Society has brought about a remarkable revival of interest in single malts. Its founder chairman is Philip Hills.
How are you?
Because without that post office van coming every day, Pip, you just wouldn't be able to run this operation at all.
No, absolutely not. Everything goes out by post, and unless you pick it up upstairs, the only way to get it is by post.
So how many bottles are you sending out a year now?
Oh, about 40,000.
40,000?
Yeah.
And what about breakages?
Very few, really surprisingly few, but this is where we pack them, and you can see how it happens.
Can we have a look?
Yes, yeah. Yes, certainly. This is where we send all the stuff up from.
So this is the final act
That's
in,
right.
in the
bottles
whole,
are packed and sent out to members in these boxes.
The thing that always interested me about the packing of the society is the bottles. I mean, if somebody said, I'm going to market a malt, but I'm not going to name it, I'm going to put a number on it, I mean, you'd have said they were crazy. How do you get away with it? Why do you do it?
We didn't have much choice, really, because the distillers' names are all registered trademark, and we had to make sure we didn't offend the distillers. So we devised this curious system of naming, whereby we give each distillery a number, and we give each cask a number, and the numerals on the bottle indicate a particular cask from a particular distillery.
68 is a certain distillery.
That's right, and that's the fourth cask
Fourth
that
cask.
distillery.
And then you have this kind of Scrabble game. You say, a distillery not 100 miles from Forres
right.
with 2 chimneys, and everybody looks up and they know. I think that's
Either that or they ring the office.
And you tell them.
But with our increasing respectability, various of the distillers have said, oh, we don't mind if you use our name. So a couple of newsletters ago, we circulated our members and said, look, guys, would you like us to name the distilleries? And I think the response was 0.006 of our members.
They said, we'll have a bottle of the 68.4.
That's right. The members all said, no, we don't want you to name it. We really like this.
Oh, I think it's great. Very appropriate, Pip. The bit of Edinburgh you chose to set up your headquarters is the Docks in Leith, which has been, associated with wines and spirits for centuries.
Yes, the building is called the Vaults, and it was built for the storage of wine. The vaults themselves probably date from 12th or 13th century, which makes it about the oldest commercial building in Scotland.
So they'd have been filled with claret, and now they're filled with whiskey. How did you get hold of the building?
Well, when I had the idea for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, I was looking for a place to do it, and I'd always liked this building. So I walked in one day and asked to see the manager and said, can I buy it? And they sold it to me.
And I gather you've won an award for doing it up.
We got an award for restoring it, so we should. It cost a packet.
And you didn't bankrupt yourself?
Well, we did, as a matter of fact, but that's beside the point. This is where it happens. This is where all the orders go out from, and this is Denise Nielsen.
Pleased to meet you. Pleased to meet you.
Denise is general manager and in charge of the lot.
I've always regarded computers as being very impersonal, and this society as being a very personal one. I mean, how do you equate the two?
I think, yes, we aim to provide a very personal service to the members. Obviously, a lot of the members are based throughout the UK, so we use the phone heavily to communicate with them. But by the same token, we have the members' room next door, so a lot of the members come in, and those members that come to stay in the 2 flats that we have an opportunity to meet them then.
What's happened is that the thing has just expanded of its own volition, and it's expanded not just in the UK but overseas, which is one of the reasons we need this kind of technology to keep in touch with our members.
So how many countries are you in at the moment?
Oh, about 7 or 8 countries. Well, Tim here, excuse us, Denise, Tim is in charge of developing the society in Japan and in the Far East generally.
Hi,
Tim Stewart.
Hi, dear.
Japan, I know, is interested in whiskey. What about Scotch malts?
For malts, I'd say the Japanese are absolutely passionate about them now. In fact, the malt market is the area that's growing whilst the blended market's going down in Japan. We went to a trade show just north of Tokyo, and we took 2 of our whiskies there. And people came along from the Nippon Bartenders Association, And they would say, what's the whiskey? I would ask them to guess. And they would ask 2, 3, 4 questions, like, is it an Islay? Is it a mainland? And within 3 or 4 questions, they could get to the answer and get to the distillery.
With all these new members all over the world, are you going to have enough casks to fulfill the orders?
Oh yes, no trouble at all. Come and have a look at this. There are tens of thousands of casks lying in distilleries all over Scotland. There are over 100 distilleries in production, and they're producing first-rate stuff. And that's available to us. The distillers reckon we're doing a good job, so they're letting us have it. Have a look. This is Laphroaig Distillery, and the stocks they are producing and laying down today are going to be the most wonderful whiskies of tomorrow.
In my experience of 25 years in the industry, there are 4 factors which give malt whiskies their individuality. The first one is the water supply, obviously, and each geographical location will give you a different characteristics in the water. Our water comes from the hills behind the distillery here, and the peat acts like a big sponge. The water picks up the minerals and elements of which are important to the character and flavour of our water. The second feature which goes to make the makeup of a malt whisky is the specification of the malted barley, and in our case that would concern the phenols, or the smokiness, if you like, of our malted barley. We do 30% of our own malting here at Laphroaig in the old-fashioned traditional way, which is a floor maltings. Now you're looking at 170-year-old technology in that respect, and it's more an art than a science. It's part of the heritage of the distillery. In the malting process, which of course is a steeping, germination and drying process, the drying here is done using peat from our own peat moss. We have something like 170 acres there, which we cut annually. With a little bit of draft, the dried peat burns very well on its own. The natural pagoda heads on the kilns draw the smoke through the floor and through the grain, the drying grain. Because the barley is wet, it readily picks up the peat smoke and imparts the phenols onto the barley. And that's where part of the Laphroaig character comes from. The third factor in the makeup of the malt whisky is the shape of the first distillation vessel, or the pot still. Now, these pot stills are always made in copper. If there is an unknown in Scotch whisky, this is one of them. No one really understands why a certain height, diameter, shape, rate of distillation gives whiskies their individual character. And we're no different here at Laphroaig. Our wash stills are different from everywhere else. It adds a little bit of mystique to the process. In this day of modern day science, we don't have too many of those. I think it's nice to keep this little bit of unknown quantity within our industry. And you might like to call us not whisky makers or distillers, but maybe alchemists. Now, the fourth factor which can influence the flavour and character of a whisky is the maturation, the type of cask you use. Now, here at Laphroaig, we only use American bourbon barrels from Kentucky, and we only use these casks once for our single malts. Because maturation is an exchange of atmospheres, all the roughness breathes through the wall of the cask, which is one of the characteristics of American white oak. And of course, our atmosphere breathes in, so the salty, seaweedy type atmosphere that we have here in Islay plays an influence on the whisky. Previously, one of the owners of the distillery traded whisky for barrels in America. Of course, once you establish a tradition, you do not change it. In our case, the maturation is either 10 or 15 years, and the casks are, for single malt anyway, are kept here for that number of years. A Lafroig bottling is a collection of 100 casks. So the gentleman we call the blender is an important part of the company setup. What he does is he samples each and every one of those casks for flavour, character and colour. Because remember, he has to put the whisky together from that 100 casks so that it's the same character, flavour and colour year in, year out.
So how did you set about getting hold of one of these single casks?
Well, I had been introduced to it by an old friend in Aberdeenshire. I used to visit them, and this old farmer friend would come over and we'd sit in the farmhouse kitchen and we would drink a bottle of his whisky. And he was in the habit of buying once a year a cask from Glenfarclas distillery. And he drew his whisky straight from the cask, at cask strength, and it was coming from particularly fine cask. And I thought it was simply the most wonderful whisky I'd ever drunk. And I'd drunk a few whiskies before then, but I'd never tasted anything quite like this. And I formed a syndicate with my pals in Edinburgh here, and we bought a cask from Glenfarclas. And I used to go up to Glenfarclas in my old motor car and bring it back. We met in the lobby of my house, siphoned it out, tried it once or twice, and divided it up into gallon jars. And the members of my whisky syndicate, which was what it became, would go off into the night clutching gallon jars. And they, of course, would give drams to their friends. Their friends would ring me up and ask if they could join the syndicate. And the society, as it is today, is essentially that syndicate writ large, but with the spirit exactly the same.
So how do you set about explaining to members when they open the bottle what the fragrance, the taste, the aroma, everything is going to be?
Well, since most of our communications are by post, it has to be by our newsletter. And in our newsletter, we describe the whiskies. There are written descriptions of the whiskies. And the written descriptions are basically the work of the Society's tasting committee. And the tasting committee is probably the most fun bit of the Society. First whiskey, guys, done us do. As you all know, this is the long defunct.
Very pass it round.
Pass it round.
It's like seeing the light of a star that became extinct millions of years ago.
Yes, wonderful. David. Zubair, I will tell you what, I'll pour another there and you can pass it to Zubair. How about that?
There we are.
Yeah, you take it. You ask the top.
Ian.
Yes. Thank you.
So, Pip, how often do you meet as a group?
About once a month these days. Just depends on what we need to taste and how many, when it comes.
And what we're talking about are samples which you've sourced from some of the 100 distilleries all over Scotland?
Yes, the distillers broach the cask and they draw up a sample which they put in these bottles and they send us bottles. We look at them briefly to see whether they're of acceptable quality or not. And if they are, they then come to the tasting committee, and it's the business of the tasting committee to inspect the whisky and to describe it so that we can write tasting notes for the Society newsletter.
So when you come to nose it, let me ask David, when you come to nose it, what in fact are you looking for?
Well, if it's an Eastern malt, the first thing I look for or smell for is what I call the smell of pear drops. But of course that's an oversimplification. In a really great single malt whisky, different flavours keep emerging and blending, and the great problem is to try and find a vocabulary for it. I mean, description is the business we're in here, and it's very difficult sometimes. You try to get berries or shrubs or leather or smokiness.
So, as a wine merchant, do you find you can apply the same kind of vocabulary to malt whiskies that you'd apply to a good claret or a good burgundy?
Oh yes, I mean, I think you tend to use the same vocabulary. I personally find it very difficult to get descriptive terms like fruits, definite fruits. I always look for taste wine, look for structure. So when David said acidity, that's the first thing I noticed about this, is the sharpness, the acidity, which is also what I look for in wine, is the freshness. But evocative terms, I tend not to use them a lot. I find that's such a subjective thing. And these tasting panels is very interesting because it's trying to find the right term which suits everyone's idea of what they're tasting. I think it's quite hard.
You know, I mean, is this a difficult exercise, trying to verbalise?
It can be difficult, but it's pleasurable. But I think the key thing is not to rush it too much. This whiskey I have here, this Dallas Stew, it's a judicious mixture of water. It's been in my glass now, I suppose, for about 15 minutes. And now my nose is finding just a hint of peat. I'm confident that the maltsters peated the barley when they malted it.
Can I have words, please, chaps? Can you let me know what does the stuff smell like before water, after water? What does it take? Before water first, what? We've got pear drops.
Well, before the water was put in the nose, as well as pear drops, I got very distinct cut grass notes off this whiskey. Very, very nice and fresh. And I thought wonderful, wonderful for summer drink.
Okay. Pear drops, cut grass, any other offers?
There's a kind of honeyed sharpness to it. It's light, but it's rich at the same time. It seems to be a perfect pre-prandial whiskey. This is not a whiskey to drink after dinner. As an aperitif, it's got that clarity, that sharpness, that fragrance, and that slightly honeyed aftertaste that makes a wonderful combination.
Yeah.
And very well balanced with it. You know,
Yes.
it really is.
Quite
And
fine.
It's a perfect aperitif whiskey, I think. It is.
That's pretty good description for a whiskey, I think.
Pip, what happens to all the samples when you finish with them?
Well, they get poured down the sink.
Down the sink?
Yes. This stuff is duty-free, and we get it on condition that it's used for quality control purposes only. So when we finish tasting it, we pour it down the sink. It gives a wonderful air of extravagance.
A lovely aroma to the sink.
And this is our members' room, Derek.
Yes. So what did this used to be when Thompson's had it?
This was a typing room when we came here.
Distinct improvement. Now, Pip, you know what I'd like? I'd like chairman's choice. Because once a quarter you choose the dram you like.
Well, yes, and I take a lot of stick for it, believe me. This quarter, it's St. Magdalene, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, that's a defunct distillery
Yes.
which was converted into flats.
Yeah.
Actually, you've got quite a few bottles here from distilleries where whiskey will never be made again.
Mm-hmm.
So these are more than usually historic malts.
Well, yes, and the remarkable thing is that the distillers contrived to close down some remarkably good distilleries, as you'll see with this. I think this was one of the finest of the lowland malts, but it seems there was no market for it. It's lovely stuff.
So this would be what, about 100 proof?
Yes, I think it's about 104. That
104.
It's a bit sharp.
It is sharp, isn't it?
Yes, it wants some water in it.
I'm always amazed when you add water to whiskey how it remarkably changes it.
Yes.
And I think improves it without any shadow of a doubt.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this stuff's far too strong to drink straight. Right, shall we have a seat and drink?
You lead on.
Right. There you go.
Doesn't come much better than that, does it?
No. Of its sort, it's about as good as it gets.
Sound.
Cheers.